So when we're cutting glass for the very first time, again the correct glass cutter grip, and always start just a couple of mil in from the edge of the piece of glass, and we always cut away from ourselves and run off the end. Now it's a constant even pressure. It's not a race. We can go as slowly as we like, as long as that pressure is consistent and it is even. When we're breaking by hands, it's our thumbs that are pointing parallel to the score line on the surface and our forefingers pointing directly back in the other direction, and simply fold the piece apart. So that's a straight line. It is exactly the same for curved lines. And that folding action, and you can see that the glass is cracked and it's run all the way through, and there's nothing stopping us from turning that around and coming back in the other direction. And we can see we've got that perfect cut. So the same applies to the other cutter variants, such as the pistol grip and the palm grip cutter. So with the pistol grip, it's that kind of grip, and it's basically that whole forearm acting as your pressure, and it's that same folding action. So why do we need pliers? If we have a very small strip that we're trying to cut off, and we're a little bit hesitant about gripping it with our fingers, the running pliers, which have the curved jaw, by placing those on top of the score line centrally and squeezing, because of the curve in the jaw, that does that folding action automatically for you. Again, they have their limitations. If you have a particularly sharp angle, like so, putting the running pliers on that piece of glass at that angle is not going to be very successful, but if you flip it around the other way, it will be successful. So the other plier variants, once we've scored, the breaking plier, they're the pliers that just meet at the tips, actually work at 90 degrees to your score line, and it just becomes a lever, and by folding it does exactly the same thing. The grazing plier, or what's sold as a combination plier, will do exactly the same as those breakers, but the added advantage of this, if you've got a shape that you need to just trim down in size, it's a matter of just gripping the glass and just what we call grazing that surface, and you can see that I'm just kind of grinding away and chipping that back, and we've got a completely different shape. That's ideally what these pliers are used for. Okay, so what can go wrong? One thing which often goes wrong when you're first starting is that lack of constant even pressure when you're running the glass cutter over the surface of the glass. So if we kind of start off okay with that pressure and then back off and then start again and then back off, and it's inconsistent, the chances of it breaking where we want it to break are remote. So you can see exactly that's not where we wanted it to break. The score line came through here, and that's the remaining bit of that score line. And even so, that's exactly where we eased off on that pressure. So that's the common downfall when people are just starting off. So it's super important to maintain that constant even pressure. The sound of a cut should be consistent. Actually, the noise is a good indicator of whether you've cut successfully or not. So it's that constant tone of that wheel running over the surface. and that'll be a nice clean cut because it was an even score. If you go too heavy, you'll get what we call flaring of the glass. So I'll use a dagger grip so I can really press hard. And if we do that, you'll see all this kind of white stuff flaking off the surface of the glass. They're actually little bits of glass that are flared up as I've gouged through the surface. Again, too much pressure can actually inhibit the breaking of the glass. So we're pretty lucky in regards to that being coming away cleanly. But too much pressure is equally as bad. It does two other things as well. It wears you out, and it actually is not that beneficial for your glass cutter. The importance of oil is primarily to lubricate the surface of the glass. It's all about heat, as well as lubricating that little wheel that's revolving around at some rapid pace in that chassis. So the oil coming through will be lubricating the wheel on the axle, and so the whole thing just runs that little bit more smoothly. And it also stops that kind of flaring on the surface of the glass. So without oil, you'll get a lot more flaring, and the more flaring, the less likelihood of it breaking where you want it to break is going to happen. So yeah, that's pretty well a perfect score. You can see there's very little or no flaring, and that'll break nice and cleanly. When cutting glass, you only get one shot at it. If you go over it and you think, oh, maybe that's not quite right, don't try and go over the same place again, because the chances of you getting over exactly the same spot is going to be almost impossible. So what happens when we run the glass cutter over the surface of the glass? So in section, if we're looking at the glass on the edge, as we've run the wheel over the surface of the glass, we kind of break through its surface tension, or scratch, for a better term, the surface, and then there's a fracture below that, and then there's a compression of its molecular structure below that. So to get that wheel to run over in exactly the same position again is almost impossible. So what happens is we do this, where it runs alongside, and as soon as we've done that, when you go to snap it, it will bounce backwards and forwards from one to the other, and then quite often, or can, simply bounce off in the wrong direction, and then the whole piece of glass is ruined. So when we're actually cutting out a pattern, whether it be for copper foil or whether it be for a stained glass panel, we need to be relatively accurate when we're cutting those shapes. So ideally, a simple design, a black line approximately 2 millimeters in width, which caters for the lead in between the glass. So when we've cut all the shapes and they're placed on this drawing, there is a gap between each and every piece of glass, the width of that black line. So when we place our glass on the surface, we try and cut as accurately and as economically as possible, and it's a matter of starting off and picking up the line, and we're going to the inside edge of that black line and tracing through. One score, one snap, replace, reposition, get it in the right spot so it's accurate, and then pick up on your second cut. So that's the first piece. Obviously, we follow suit with all the other pieces until everything's completed, and then we start the assembly.